Welcome to Pigeon River Farm, doing farming right. I'm Robert Brown, the owner of Pigeon River Farm. Thank you for viewing. In tonight's episode, we're going to be talking to Mike Waters on building our immune system. Ultimately, the goal here is to produce the healthiest animal product, and vegetables that I can possibly produce. And it's critical that the immune system on the animals are real strong. It eliminates any health problems. And in turn, that is able to pass on to the people that consume. Not everybody have the luxury of having our high quality grass-fed beef, our pastured poultry eggs, or a variety of vegetables. So we thought tonight we would discuss how you can do it also, what you can encourage your farmer to develop best practice. So what would I demand? Really, what would I demand of my farmer that produces the food that I feed my family? So that is going to be our discussion tonight. So Mike, I got a couple questions here for you. One is, over the last 100+ years, mineral depletion in our soil has been very significant. We have really mined the soil for all these nutrients and not replenished them. How do we go about replenishing the nutrients in the soil?
Well, the history of that is the universities just focused on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK, and then lime. So even as I got out of college, they claimed that that was all there was. They didn't even do micronutrient testing. They didn't break down calcium versus magnesium in ratio to potassium or phosphorus and sulfur. So they bred the crops accordingly for high yield. And so what they took away was the need to reproduce its seed, to have a viable seed. And that goes back at least 50 years. And so the seeds, the soil, everything is all just set to produce high yield. And during that time, the soil can get way out of balance. Again, made up with extra nitrogen added to overcome. And then some very low trace minerals because the seed did not need to reproduce itself, being a hybrid seed. So that's just a little bit of the history as to why the minerals have been depleted. And but from there we can go into specific areas and soils as to which minerals have been depleted.
Well, something that I don't raise here, but it's just been a curiosity of mine. They said in 1980, so not too long ago, one orange would have enough calcium in it and vitamin C to give you your daily recommendation. Today, it's been found that you need to have 8 oranges to produce the same amount of calcium and vitamin C that you needed in 1980. So I just find it, and the same thing has been true for apples, and more of the vegetables that we eat that cannot be as nutrient dense as an egg. It cannot be as nutrient dense as beef. So people are kind of heading in that direction. They want to eat more and more vegetables, and fruits, but at the same time, the nutrient value of these have diminished. And I just think more and more with what I hear in the news every day, with the concern here with these viruses coming around, spreading around the world, and no pharmaceutical cure, at least in the foreseeable future, our immune systems are going to be critical. They're going to be critical path. And if we don't know what's in what we're eating, there is no standard for this. It isn't like you can look at the package of your peas or apples or winter squash or oranges or steak or eggs and determine how much nutrients are in there.
Well, there is one easy way that you can just visually look at. Say, for example, like you said about the orange. The calcium and magnesium are tremendously important for cell wall integrity. So if you're seeing that the oranges or the apples aren't holding up, but rather they're getting rotten, then you know it's lacking minerals, because a properly mineralized fruit, especially any citrus or apple or anything, really, potatoes even, if there's enough calcium there for cell wall integrity, they'll just dehydrate. They won't rot.
Funny you bring that up. In our years that we were growing winter squash for Organic Valley, we ended up leaving some spaghetti and kabocha squash in the shop. Now, the shop is kept at a normal winter temperature, around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, relatively dry environment. And in the summertime, it's pretty much whatever ambient temperature it is. We discovered squash in a container that had pretty much just dried up, but some of them were still semi-viable, almost a year, 11 months out. So we found them in August, and they never rotted.
Exactly.
That was an interesting thing. I was always so curious of why them winter squash didn't rot.
So that's a visible sign right there. You can just look at it. If your fruit that you're buying from the grocery store is tending to go bad quickly, they say one apple spoils a whole barrel. Well, if you could put a rotten apple in with a bucket or a barrel of really, really highly mineralized apples, and it won't rot the whole bunch, because the cell wall integrity is there.
Well, that's really interesting. Now, in our high tunnel, since we overwinter the poultry in there, and um, the amount of nutrients that are applied during the winter months via the chickens are some of the best that I guess we could possibly acquire. You've been providing them to us and producing this ultra high quality product that we have in our eggs. But in turn, our summertime crops that are raised in there um, are also, we use the zone products, so we're using all the microbiology on them, and then in turn we've been using some of the Redmond products for some of their mineralization that way. So we've used a lot of different routine over a lot of years, and we have noticed that that the food that we take out of there, if it's the raspberries, it's the tomatoes, and I don't know, I don't want to be the cheerleader of my own, but it seems like uh, the uh, the food almost has an addicting taste to it.
Yes.
Or I can tell, maybe worded another way, is I go out for a meal some other place and the food I don't seem fulfilling. It just seems like it doesn't have any vigor. I wish we had something in English language that really covered that term, but it just doesn't seem fulfilling. And if you've
Right.
never had quality food, you don't know that. You never had that.
Mm-hmm.
And what concerns me is this deteriorated diet, and with the concern here of this virus coming out, what effect could that have on somebody? And can somebody improve their immune system by trying to source, by, as I guess I said earlier, demanding of their farmer to raise nutrient rich? Can anything be done in the short cycle?
Well, first of all is just to buy organic when it comes to all produce, because uh, starting with say strawberries uh, and your really soft fruits, and then your delicate salad greens, they'll have, as you eat it, they'll have 50 different chemicals that can be tested and proven to be on the leaf as you eat it. So right there, you're disrupting your immune system by eating those chemicals. So just taking those chemicals away uh, makes a big difference. So on to point number two, why did those fruits and vegetables need 50 different chemicals? Well, because they would have gotten moldy, they would have rotted, they would have just fell apart by the time it got to the store. So you can see, well, those fruits and vegetables do not have the integrity to maintain the nutrition. So just by going completely organic, you're most of the way there. But now you can find a local producer that'll go that extra step to have the high bricks, which means it's a high sugar content, which also will have the different essential oils for flavor, and it'll have a higher mineral content. So on the refractometer, when I would check the things that are very high in bricks, it would have a fuzzy line, which meant it was also very high in minerals. And if it was a very distinct line, it meant it was low on minerals.
That's interesting. I have the bricks tester, and we have tested a variety of our crops here. And the sugar content is always, thanks to you, way above the average that you'd find in our area. But that is also interesting. I recall seeing that kind of a fuzzy line on there,
Yep.
and I remember hearing somewhere. Now you defined it, that was actually a good indicator. So that
Mm-hmm.
brings up a very interesting point. That could a consumer buy a refractometer? I mean, if you really cared about this, would that be a viable test to do with store-bought and greens as an example?
Oh, you could go in the store and you could ask for samples, and then squeeze it with a garlic squeezer, and that would be very educational for whoever is manning the deli or the fruit department.
Right. But I mean,
Because
if you,
usually they're willing to let you sample things.
yeah, but I'm even thinking about if you simply just bought it, because again, the concern here is our world is potentially changing. I can't predict any better than anyone else, but we could be in a little bit of trouble in the next couple of months with this disease coming out. So what used to be kind of a frivolous expense, let's say buying a refractometer, may not be so foolish if a person could at least source food that's commercially available and then make an effort to find a farmer that can grow it or that does grow it to that standard.
Well, I used to deliver to Whole Food stores, and they would potentially have the quality organic fruits that we could eat, and they're willing to do samples. So it would be very educational to do this in front of the store staff and show them what you're looking for, because a lot of the people that work behind the counters, even at a store like Whole Foods, are not aware of the features and benefits of what they're selling. So, so first of all, you choose the organic just to get away from the immune disruptors, the endocrine disruptors. And then once you have a clean food, and again, the only way that an organic fruit or a vegetable makes it to the store shelf without all the chemicals, it's already quite a bit higher in integrity. So now if you can further show, well, this particular type of an apple or whatever is a higher bricks, well, it's not just to be sweeter, you're seeing that it has a greater integrity. So it's really good just to develop that relationship with the grocery store that you're working with, whether it's a local co-op or say a nationwide stores such as Whole Foods or any of them that really would take the extra effort to get a quality product in.
Well, I've been following a gentleman online for a number of years, Mike Adams. His nickname's the Health Ranger, Natural News, and he's got, in part of his business, he does testing of food for toxicity. That's kind of the main thing. He tests food and sees what is in it. And the reason I've been following him is my big concern here on glyphosate that is used on small grains for termination, as so many people are unaware of, and we could make a whole show on that. But the terminating, in other words, taking oats, wheat, barley, rye, and spraying it with Roundup and glyphosate, the chemical name, 3 to 5 days before you're going to combine it to kill off the weeds and kill the plant. So it's a dry harvest. And he did a lot of testing of common breakfast cereals, and it was just shocking the amount of chemicals, heavy metals, and specifically glyphosate that was in them. Well, I'm worried both protect my family, but we use organic, so we know we're safe in that regards. But I also want to make sure on anything we source for our livestock is safe. So
Yes.
we just know the farmers that we purchase from. But one of the things that is concerning to me on that note is, and we utilize a service called Drift Watch, and I'll
Mhm.
cover that more in depth on another episode. But that basically puts a barrier on your farm, so no commercial sprayer would even envision that spray drifting onto your farm.
Right.
So they don't have accidental. That actually happens in the industry. It's pretty sad. But I've known of organic land that had got sprayed, ruined the farmer, just absolutely ruined the farmer. They had the wrong address. They showed up and sprayed
Oh,
the weeds on the farm, and it ended up being an organic farm. Of course, they apologized and probably paid for a little bit, but ruined everything.
oh
Uh,
my.
and that happens. And then again, there's the drift and all that. So the chemicals are just getting to us every imaginable way. So we talk vegetables. Now we'll talk the small grains. Small grains being a significant part of our diet. If you're eating
Right.
breakfast cereal, if you eat any bread products, you think about it, you're always eating small grains. And that is another one where we have mined the soil. If it's small grains are in a corn bean rotation, or if they come more from the Canadian provinces or the Great Plains, where they might do wheat after wheat after wheat, uh, and at some point, all them critical nutrients that are in the soil have all been mined out of them. That root strata is at such a point that it takes out the minerals that are in the soil, and they're not replenished. There is no economic model out there to do what myself and other good farmers that do it right apply. It's expensive. It's very expensive. So they just put on the basic, the basic thing to keep it growing.
Well, my grandfather, again, I learned a lot from my grandparents by growing up on their farm. And he told me about if you used a chemical fertilizer and sprinkled it around an apple tree, there would be bugs and worms. If you used fresh cow manure and sprinkled that around the apple tree, there would be bugs and worms. But if they made compost and then they put the finished compost around the apple tree, there were no bugs or worms. And then later in life, I learned the mechanics of how that works. Because say, for example, if you have too much nitrogen, that'll gas off and send off a signal to the insect, come and get me, I'm not healthy. And, or if something's out of balance, the plants will give off an infrared frequency, which the insects spot and say, well, that's my kind of food. And they'll go after that tree or any of the vegetables. So basically, if an insect goes after a plant and wants to eat it, that means it's not fit for human food. But it's much simpler to use the chemical fertilizer and buy the pesticides and make a beautiful looking apple or whatever, put it on the shelf. And if you would have let nature run its course, that apple would have been eaten by insects. The worms would have crawled through it. And even if you did get it, you'd put it out through the distribution channel and it would have rotted. So that apple was not fit for human food. to give a person true vitality. And this is the whole error of our agricultural system, is that we've been taking food that's not fit for a human to eat and putting it out there on the shelf. And because it looks good and it's a lower price, people buy it.
So I'm going to go back to my knowledge here of animals because I'm not a medical doctor. Don't even say at a Holiday Inn to pretend I'm one. I simply look at animal health and just make an extrapolation onto human health. It's easy to determine if you were to give an animal poor quality food. I get to farms that run on the cheap, and they spend more money with the vet and pharmaceuticals than they would ever spend if they bought expensive feed, but they say expensive feed's too expensive. So what's so interesting about that is when you're aware of your environment, you will make that effort. And in the farming environment, we now have again, with this whole issue with this disease and the trade with China and so many of the antibiotics. I read a statistic, actually Department of Ag just put it out, that 97% of our commercially viable antibiotics come from China. And the agricultural industry is the biggest consumer of antibiotics. It's what keeps the livestock the protein sources that we have out there, they live in a pharmaceutical bath because of the low quality feed. And many times the conditions that they're kept within are questionable at best. And now that source is in jeopardy. Odds are it won't be easily replaced. So what's going to happen here? I mean, I don't want to be a fortune teller, but if our food sort is being protected by antibiotics and the low grade food and the antibiotics are not going to be available, what could be the complications of that?
The complications are the low vitality that we have as people. And when you come to a virus, there really isn't a good treatment. Say, for example, they've used the antibiotics for bacteria, but viruses don't respond to antibiotics. So the thing is we can take on a virus, and while the virus is in its initial stages and really reproducing, there's nothing to kill it. And so what a doctor will do is they'll give an antibiotic so that the bacterial infection doesn't settle in after the virus.
I was informed, I did not realize this, but things that can get on the farm, scours, that's basically a calf diarrhea, and pastorella. I have been to adjoining farms and I've been to the sale barn, and I know I'm exposed to this. That's why we make sure the health of our animals is so high, because I am, so to speak, the gateway to the diseases that come onto the farm. I'm the typhoid Mary of this farm. I realize that. I do take a lot of precautions, but within the realm of everyday life, it's difficult. The animals have to, so to speak, be able to withstand that. We don't have the calf in the bubble or the baby chick in the bubble here. They are very robust. They have to deal with it. But what I found was interesting is, since farmers are exposed to so many of these pathogens, what I had read is actually our immune systems are faster responding because we're constantly exposed to this.
Yes.
But for that to work, you have to have a healthy body. You have to have a healthy immune system for that to work. Otherwise, these things would be dragging you down. You'd feel kind of, is this correct? Would you, even though you get exposed to a virus that won't affect us, a different species, avian flu, but the avian flu that doesn't affect humans, that still our body reacts to it, and it has to attack it, and it uses up a certain amount of energy, correct?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I can say from my own experience that, say, if I'm in contact with somebody that has a flu, I may not get the symptoms of a flu, but it will make me tired. It'll wear me down. It'll take me a few days to get my energy back, even though I never contract a symptom. And I think that's the way it works. But the difference between the animal and the human virus is that there's no connecting points to the human tissue. It's specific for each animal. So if it crosses over, for example, from a swine flu to become infective of humans, well, then it's crossed species, and then that will cause our system to react. But say the rotocoronavirus that affects the baby calves will only affect baby calves, and that does not have the receptors to attach to human tissue,
Right, but
only
yet
the bovine.
right, but yet I understand our bodies will respond to it because it's a foreign substance. It is not a threat,
Yeah.
but our body doesn't know that till it responds and kills it off. That brings up the kind of the next area, something you and I've worked with for quite a while now. It's been very successful, and now some interesting scientific data has come out, and that is when we have had a rescue calves, we've put them on the egg diet. In other
Oh,
words,
yeah.
they get the milk. We use a milk replacer, an organic milk replacer, but we also put them on the eggs. And this was something that was known, I guess, in excess of 100 years ago. It was kind of discovered, and now it's been rediscovered. Is the egg that comes from the farm. So the chicken has to live on the farm where the calf is residing, because the chicken can produce the antibodies to virtually every pathogen out there. That's what I understand is the chicken will bring in, and it's because they live in relatively dirty environment. They're scratching and digging and all that. So they're down in some pretty nasty environment every day. They develop the antibody to protect the egg, being their ultimate baby. And that protecting that in turn, they've developed the antibody. When you get the calf the egg, it allows it to absorb in that antibody and has the programming. And it has proved we've had 0 scours on the rescue calves, and vitality is really, I mean, almost, if I could, I'd probably go back into bottle calves again. It was such an obvious trick. Talking to a number of local Amish, this is something, of course, they knew about. Took us a discovery. And I understand there was 2 studies done by veterinarians in the last decade that proved this out. Unfortunately, in big operations, they're told to get the poultry off the farm because it doesn't meet their hygiene standards. So our laws kind of work in against. So in that said, that's kind of the high end of it. But like with our eggs, since we put in kale, the birds have sunlight, kelp. They have kale also. We put into kelp. The birds have all the minerals in there. They're exposed during the winter months to vitamin D. They have lots and lots of sunlight. They're scratching and dusting in the soil that's flush with minerals. How much of that is taken along? And we all know about the publicized effects of pastured eggs. But now we're getting into talking about the immune system. When a person eats an egg that's where the chicken's been raised and kept in that environment, how much of that nutrient is passed along?
Well, you need to know there is a tremendous difference between the way chickens are raised for commercial market versus homegrown backyard chickens. And commercial chickens, well, they'll say free range, natural, but basically the chickens are shoulder to shoulder in that barn in order to to fill the barn up to get enough birds to cash flow. So there really aren't any places where they can go and dust themselves and all, because chickens are shoulder to shoulder. And so just giving them the space to run around, well, then you come into the category of free range. And all that means is they're not shoulder to shoulder and they're not in a cage. They have a little bit of running room. So then you can have an area where they dust. So you can put out some clay minerals that are really good just to have that clay in their diet, such as the Redmond conditioner. And then you can put out some diatomaceous earth, and then that will not only give them, say, a silica source, which they're not getting from their grains, and as well as something that'll kill some of your dust mites and all those other things that birds can pick up. And well, there's all different kinds of mites and lice and all that. So instead of using the chemical sprays to control those things, you can just give them an area where they can dust themselves. And so that's a huge difference between commercial chickens and anything that's backyard, low volume, from free range. But then when you get to pasture, that's a whole nother level. That free range doesn't give the benefits. So the gold standard definitely is the pastured poultry, with the free range being second best.
I have read a couple medical articles on eggs and some of the big advantages. So if the birds are raised, they were doing farming right, birds are raised correctly with everything like you described, because that's what we do here. We use the diatomaceous earth, we use the mineralized clay. I mean, we try to do the gold standard. What do in that egg, what do we pass on to the consumer? What does the consumer actually get off of that effort pertaining to their immune system? How do we fortify? Is it a significant factor? What's your words on it?
Well, for example, if you take vitamin K2, which most of us are short on, and it's a very essential vitamin, just for us as humans to have. And the animal products will all have some vitamin K2 in it because they're an animal. They have bacteria in their guts or in their rumen, and that's where this is produced. So even a factory farm chicken or egg will have some K2 in it. And so you might be, say, if you just put a relative number on, you're at the very worst, say you'd have a reading of 1 on vitamin K2. And if it's, you can add some nutrients even in a factory farm, which will double that up to, say, a number of 2. But by doing the organic methods, usually that'll take it up to a number of 4 relative to the 1, for the very lowest level. But then when you get up to chickens that are on pasture, it could be a 6. And I've worked with farmers that have actually worked with the universities and tested right on their own farm. And then they did samples from farms nearby. And it worked out just that way. So the idea is that you could eat a dozen of eggs that you get from the factory farm, and that will have the same amount of vitamin K2 as 2 eggs that are from a pasture situation.
That is
And
really
that's the same with conjugated linoleic acid, which is also very essential for building immunity and health, as well as some other fat-soluble vitamins.
So if a person, again, was concerned about this disease coming our way, and hopefully it doesn't, we're all praying that it doesn't get bad, but to enhance your immune system, so we discussed using the Brix test there for your vegetables and your greens. Additionally, we talked about the eggs and what that's involved. I think, well, next question I have for you is on meat products. The way that I handle my beef operation here is kind of unique. Even the breed of cattle that we chose, being a very slow growing type, doesn't have an excessive amount of fat, actually very lean, and we put it in a chemical-free environment. They've never have been exposed to any kind of toxins, chemicals whatsoever. So that's one of our goals. So the meat that is produced, we had a customer who's a physician say to me some years ago, walking through our pasture, looking at all of the different plants in there. I remember specifically, they were seeing the doctor was seeing plantain and made a big deal out of that, and said if I could give every one of my chronically ill patients 2 to 4 ounces of your meat every day, most of my serious problems would simply go away. That pharmaceuticals are unable to fix. So if that's the case where people that are chronically ill, that we are really in trouble from a nutrient standpoint where the immune system's real low, we're all going to be potentially fighting a disease here that we have no immune system to. So where does beef, pastured, grass-fed beef fall into that equation?
Well, just from my own personal observations and what few research programs that I've seen on that subject is, for example, as we were talking, the density of the nutrients. And so you could have 4 ounces of grass-fed beef and it would have the same nutrient density as a pound of just your regular hormone-based, your antibiotic-based feedlots. There would be actually, you'd have to have at least a pound, if not more, to get the same amount of nutrients as in 4 ounces of grass-fed. But on the inverse of that, I found that I could eat a pound of grass-fed beef and I would feel great. But if I ate a pound of factory farm feedlot, with the hormones and the chemicals and all that, and the high corn, I can't eat a pound. I'll get nauseous before I get that much in. So it's kind of like, it's not like you can go eat a pound of factory farm corn-fed beef and have the same benefit of 4 ounces of grass-fed, because it just doesn't work that way. But if you wanted to really have a nice meal, well, you could have whatever your body size or your metabolism. You can have the grass-fed beef, and you know that there's no negatives, it's just positives, and you'll get the full amount of again, the K2, the CLA, the carotenes, the minerals, the trace mineral content, and you can have your daily requirement met from a smaller amount than getting it from a factory farm.
Well, think about our whole conversation here tonight. We keep coming back to something that always sits in the back of my mind here, and that farmers, and I hate to speak ill of my brethren because we all want to earn a living and do well, but we have really, in many respects, become part of the problem. Consumer demanding cheap food, don't want to spend anything. In turn, we have been delivering low quality, cheap food. So it's been a cycle. I would call it a race to the bottom instead of a race to the top.
Exactly.
The quality of food, has deteriorated so much. And I think what I've read is the 1970s always been kind of a benchmark. From 1970, we've been in a very rapid decline because that was kind of the last of general conventional practices that had still had a value added to it. Before, everything was about production. Now it's all about quantity. I go to many different farming events. I take off my organic hat or my grass-fed hat, and I go there with my Mr. Chemical hat, so I fit in. And I never ever have heard, I don't think I've ever heard anyone bring up nutrient value, the quality from a standpoint of health of the end product. All I ever hear about is yield. And it's just what the world we've allowed to happen. And trust me, if you're a consumer, you're not off the hook because this is what you have demanded. And the farming industry has delivered what you demanded. What you need to do is you need to tell your farmer, if that starts with the store or wherever you need to go, you need to tell them that I want nutrient rich, high quality food, and I'm willing to pay for it. Because right now, I really believe this virus is going to be the eye opener. It's very sad. This is a really sad uh, ending here, to have a sickness like this be the encouragement for producing healthy food. I hope the sins of our fathers aren't that become part of this, but we are really in a challenged condition here. So, Mike, I know you've spent 40 plus years of your professional career trying to get farmers to do it right, to do farming right. And now I guess the opportunity has really come about, to, because I think we're going to find that the consumer is going to want this. They're going to be able to quantify it, because here I now have a danger of getting something that I may not have an immunity to. What can I do? How do I go about? And the pharmaceutical companies are not coming to the rescue, at least in the short term. So
Well,
I'm
and
going to give you the
you
last word
mentioned
here for tonight.
you mentioned the 40 plus years, and I learned all of these things from people who were doing it 40 years before I was. In other words, they were my mentors, and I saw this working. And even locally, there would be old-time organic farmers, and then they would show me things. And so all I can say is, even so, that I've been doing this, there were people working on all of these things years before. And the university professors that worked with these things were fired, or they were just put out to pasture with their pension. And their higher up people said, we can't be doing this. We'll lose all of our funding. And it just rippled through the same way. Anything that was done to make people healthy from the food they ate was defunded, because the people funding the universities were the pharmaceutical companies
Well, that is really
and the
interesting.
chemical fertilizer companies.
That is very interesting.
But the studies were all done back in the 20s and 30s already.
Now you know my affliction for trying to find old agricultural books. It's one of my hobbies, is to
Yes.
find books that were written somewhere between the 1880s, 1890s, and about the late 30s, early 40s. And after that, it started to deteriorate. Now, there's a lot of current publications that are just world class, but I'm saying the really root, the original science. We were pretty brilliant people back at the turn of the 19th century. I mean, we really seemed like we had a fair. There was farming methods, granted, we were some erosion, stuff like that. It was a real problem. But we were learning more and more how to produce nutrient-rich food. That's what the focus was. It was making people healthier through food. Now it's making people, I guess, bigger through food. But the health is not part of it.
Well, after World War II, they had huge factories devoted to producing nitrogen. And instead of needing them for bombs, they looked for ways to use them as fertilizer. And then we had our gas warfare methods they were looking at. And they just said, well, it kills insects too, besides people. Let's find agricultural use. And that's what funded the universities, because these were plants that were already built from war money, and to let them be idle would have been, in a sense, a waste of money. So pretty much all of our farm chemicals go back to bio warfare chemicals, and they were used to kill people. And they just happened to find out they also kill insects. So instead of killing people, they're killing insects using their same factory. And the money made was so good using these products, by masking unhealthy foods, by putting good looking foods on the shelf for cheap. There was so much money to be made by those pharmaceutical companies, those the military industrial complex, you might say, that they made sure the competition was totally silenced. And they just made money back in the 50s and 60s, switching farmers over to the modern methods. And the price is paid in the human health, but because it's not a one-to-one relationship, it's more of a holistic system where you can connect the things we've been talking about to human health by looking at the living model, the whole living system. We can start to see, well, what we did here at point A is affecting us down here at point N, O, and P, and the straight typical research that's done will never bring that out. It's you got to look at it as a whole living system, not just as a linear scientific method.
Well, Mike, tonight we really got into a real serious deep dive here on the problem. So the next one we'll be working on is we'll start looking at solutions to this, things that consumers can do and farmers can both do to make things better. We'll try to share some of our wisdom of others, and get a consumer base that's interested in buying nutrient-rich food that will protect them and their family. And for farmers to produce that will be an income stream so they're not living in poverty, trying to produce cheap food that's harming everybody. So I want to thank you so very much for all your wisdom again, and we will be resuming this very soon. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.